When your own son looks you in the eye and says, "You're not welcome this Christmas," something inside you breaks. It doesn't matter how old you are or how many birthdays you've seen. Nothing prepares you for the moment. Your blood rejects you like a stranger. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply nodded, stood up from the couch I helped him buy, and walked out of the house I paid for. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I made one phone call. By New Year's Day, their mortgage was gone, not paid, canceled, and that was just the beginning. They thought they could erase me from the story I helped them write. But this time, I wasn't going to disappear quietly. My name is Richard Alvarez. I'm 62 years old, born and raised on the south side of Sacramento. I built houses for a living, calloused hands, early mornings, long days under the sun. I also built a life with my wife, Maria, modest, yes, but full of laughter, love, and warmth. We had one son, Daniel, my pride. He was the kind of boy who took apart radios just to figure out how they worked, then tried to rebuild them better. He'd follow me around job sites with a child-sized tool belt, asking questions faster than I could answer. He once used duct tape and plywood scraps to build a bookshelf for Maria. Crooked as hell, but she called it art. That was Daniel. Curious, caring, always watching, always learning. Then he met Lena Jenkins. Lena came from East Sacramento, where even the sidewalks seemed to know how to behave. Her father, Cody, was the kind of man who dropped golf references in conversations about grocery shopping. Her mother, Catherine, wore pearls to the post office. They hosted wine tastings, vacationed in the Hamptons, and spoke of the working class like it was an extinct species. When Daniel brought Lena home, Maria laid out her best dishes and made enchiladas from scratch. Lena smiled, said all the right things, complimented the flavors, but something in her tone said, quaint. She never said anything directly. Lena didn't need to. Her compliments always came with a side of condescension. At dinner parties, she'd sip her wine and say things like, "My father taught me the importance of asset liquidity. Daniel's dad, he's in construction. Isn't he such vital work, especially in these economic times?" Always with a delicate laugh. Like she was including me, but I could feel the room shift every time she spoke. I was the unspoken contrast manual labor in a room full of manicured fingernails. Still, I stayed quiet because Daniel seemed happy. And Maria, God bless her, whispered to me that Lena would come around. That love softens edges. When they bought their house, they needed help with the down payment. I gave it to them. $45,000. I didn't blink. Then Daniel lost his job. I stepped in again. $2,800. Month after month, year after year. I never kept count. Lena never thanked me. But the granite countertops arrived. So did the $1,000 stand mixer. She posted photos online with captions like, "Feeling so grateful for life's little luxuries." And I watched, and I waited, because I thought if I gave enough, I'd always have a place at their table. Turns out, you can pay for the feast and still be left outside the door. After a while, the silence between us became routine. Not angry silence, not even awkward, just absence. A kind of quiet erasure. I was still around. Of course. Still paying the mortgage every month. Still fixing the leaky faucets, mowing their lawn, helping with the kids when the nanny had an emergency. But they stopped seeing me, not with their eyes, with their memory. I remember one Sunday, Lena was hosting a little brunch with her friends. I was under the sink, tightening a pipe she'd complained about the week before. She walked past me like I was the hired help. Then I heard her laugh and say to her guests, "We're so lucky. Daniel's dad is very handy, old school kind of guy." They all chuckled. I smiled too. But something inside me shifted that day. No one asked how I was doing. No one noticed I'd skipped lunch to finish the patio repairs. When I finished, Lena handed me a towel without a word and returned to sipping her mimosa. That month, they bought a new dining set, oak, polished, imported. I'd seen it online, $5,000. The same month, they told me they were a bit short on utilities again, so I paid again. And just like that, I started disappearing inside my own generosity. I stopped buying new clothes, My winter boots had holes in them, but I told myself Sacramento didn't get that cold. I started buying groceries on discount. Rice, eggs, canned tuna. I switched from fresh vegetables to frozen ones. Just until Daniel got back on his feet. Just until things stabilized. Funny how just until can stretch into 5 years. I told myself I didn't mind. That this was what love looked like. That Maria would have wanted me to be the anchor. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I stopped giving, I'd lose what little place I still had in their lives. They didn't see it, but I was already standing outside their circle. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I was no longer useful in a way they could measure. And then came Christmas. The decorations were already up when I dropped by that week. A 12-foot artificial tree stood in their living room, covered in white and gold ornaments. Perfect. Untouched. Like something out of a magazine. Lena lit a vanilla-scented candle. Daniel poured coffee into a ceramic mug that probably cost more than my entire kitchen set. I remember thinking how beautiful it all looked, and how none of it felt like home. "Dad, we need to talk," Daniel said, his voice unusually small. I smiled. Not because I felt joy, but because I already knew something was wrong. That kind of smile people wear in hospitals, just to stop themselves from falling apart. I was thinking I could bring my turkey this year, the one with sage stuffing, your mother's favorite. Remember how she used to say it was better than her grandmother's? Daniel looked down at the marble table. The same table I helped him choose, when Lena said their old one was too pedestrian. He didn't respond. "Actually," he began, clearing his throat. "Lena's parents are coming this year, and they feel it might be better if you sat this one out. Like it was a baseball game. Like I was a substitute player. Not a father. Just this year," he added quickly, eyes still avoiding mine. "They're used to a certain atmosphere." I looked around the room. The silk curtains, the hardwood floors, the chandelier, all paid for by me. I had poured my life into these walls. My time, my savings, my love. I had made this atmosphere. And what atmosphere is that, Daniel? I asked, though I already knew the answer. He flinched, just slightly. They have traditions, formal dinners, quiet settings, and I didn't fit. That was what he couldn't say. "Where would you like me to be?" "Then," I asked. He hesitated. "Maybe Aunt Rosa's, or we could do something after the holidays. Just the two of us." The words stung more than I expected, not because of what they meant, but because of how easily he said them. As if I were an obligation to be rescheduled, I stood up, knees aching not from age, but from the weight of years spent carrying a family that had quietly let me go. As I walked to the door, I passed family portraits lined up like silent witnesses. In each one, I seemed to shrink less visible, less essential, until I was barely there. My hand rested on the doorknob. "Tell Lena's parents," I said without turning back. "Merry Christmas." Then I stepped outside. The cold air slapped my face, but I welcomed it. It reminded me I could still feel something. Inside me, everything had gone quiet, not because the pain wasn't there, but because it had settled too deep to make a sound. Not the kind of pain you cry over, the kind that becomes a room inside your chest. Furnished, familiar, and I walked to my truck, not as a guest who'd been excluded, but as a father who had finally been replaced. I sat in my truck for a long time after I pulled away from their house. The dashboard clock blinked 7:42 p.m. Christmas lights sparkled on every porch I passed, little displays of warmth and belonging. None of them were mine. When I got home, the porch light was still flickering. Another repair I hadn't gotten around to. I stepped inside. The house felt colder than usual, not because of the weather, but because of the silence. No scent of dinner, no music, no laughter, just the old ticking wall clock and the soft groan of wood settling. Maria used to make this house feel full, even on the quietest nights. Since she passed, I'd filled the space with distraction. Bills, chores, transfers to Daniel's account, always something to do, always someone to help. I told myself that keeping busy was love. But really, It was grief, dressed up as duty. I poured a cup of coffee, but it sat untouched on the table. My phone buzzed. I didn't look. I knew the name before I saw it. I let it ring, and then I let it stop. At some point, I found myself in the hallway closet, pulling down an old box marked Maria. Dusty, untouched. I hadn't opened it since the week after the funeral. I don't know why I did it that night. Maybe I needed to hear her voice again, even if only through ink and paper. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue, was a letter. The handwriting was hers, steady, looping. Unmistakably Maria. To Richard, it said on the envelope. In case you forget your worth. My throat tightened. I sat down and read. It wasn't long, just a page. But every word felt like she'd written it yesterday. If someday you find yourself giving more than you're receiving, if Daniel forgets where he came from, if the world starts treating you like you're optional, promise me you'll remember who you are. I read it 3 times before I folded it back carefully. Then I walked to my desk and opened the folder I'd kept hidden for months. Mortgage statements, transfer receipts, credit card records. I added them up. $237,000. That night, I didn't cry either. Not because the pain had dulled, but because Maria's letter had finally made something clear. Love does not require you to disappear. I picked up the phone, dialed the bank. I need to cancel an automatic payment, I said. The woman on the line was polite, efficient. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. When I hung up, I looked around my old, peeling kitchen. The walls needed paint. The windows leaked in the winter. But for the first time in years, the space felt mine again. And I was done paying to be unwanted. The next morning, I slept in. For the first time in years, there was no automatic withdrawal waiting to drain my account. The quiet felt different. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was clean, honest, like the silence of a man who had finally told the truth. At 10:47 a.m., my phone rang. Lena. I stared at her name on the screen for a few seconds. Then, against better judgment, I picked up. Richard, she said, skipping greetings entirely. I need you to pick up my parents from the airport this afternoon. Flight from Portland lands at 2. Cedarwin, Alaska Air. Baggage claim 3. I blinked. Did you forget what happened last night? She sighed, as if I were being difficult. Look, whatever that was about. Let's just focus on logistics. My parents need a ride, and you're the only one free during the day. Daniel has meetings. It wasn't even a question, not a request. It was an expectation. The entitlement in her tone wasn't new. But this time, something inside me finally stopped giving. I'm not picking them up, I said calmly. Silence. Excuse me, she snapped. I said, I won't be picking them up. Find someone else. There was a pause on the line, and then her voice turned sharp. Richard, this isn't the time for one of your moods. You're being petty. My parents are guests, and you've always been helpful. It's literally the least you can do. I laughed once, softly. I've done the most, Lena. For 5 years, quietly, completely, and last night, you made it clear that I don't belong in your version of family. I never said that. You didn't have to. Her voice climbed a notch. You're embarrassing yourself. My parents are expecting someone polite, reliable. Don't make a scene. I stood by the window, watching a squirrel dig through leaves in the yard. Free, small, unbothered. Then tell them to call a cab. You're seriously going to leave them stranded? No, I said. You are. I ended the call before she could respond. Set the phone on the table. Silence returned, warm and earned. At 2:15 p.m., while Cody and Catherine Jenkins waited for a chauffeur that would never arrive. I was sitting in my armchair with a cup of tea and the Sunday paper. I flipped to the crossword, 7 across. Delayed satisfaction. 12 letters. I smirked. Postponement. Fitting. By early evening, I'd lost count of the missed calls. The porch light flickered once, then went dark, leaving the front of the house in shadow. I was just finishing the dishes when the pounding started. Not knocking, pounding. Violent, insistent. Each blow against the door was like a demand. Open up. Justify yourself. Submit. I opened the door a crack, and Cody Jenkins shoved it wide with his shoulder. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he bellowed, chest heaving, face flushed like he'd been bottling this rage for years. Catherine was right behind him, lips drawn into a tight, judgmental line. Lena brought up the rear, eyes wild, coat half off, like she hadn't even finished getting dressed before charging over here. "You left us stranded like dogs," Cody spat. "In front of everyone? You humiliated us," Catherine screeched. People were staring. Lena's voice cut in, sharp and shrill. "Do you know what kind of embarrassment this causes my parents? What people will say?" I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at the three of them, standing there in my hallway like a jury that had already passed sentence. Cody's finger jabbed at the air. "You're done. You understand? You're finished. I have friends in this city. Friends who don't forget. You treat family like this," Catherine snapped. "You think that's normal?" "No," I said quietly. "But treating someone like a servant for 5 years, then cutting them out of Christmas. Is that normal?" Silence. "You don't speak to my wife like that," Cody growled. "I'm not speaking to your wife," I said, eyes locked on Lena. "I'm speaking to the woman who used me like a bank account and called it love." Lena stepped forward, fury shaking her voice. "You'll regret this." "No," I replied. I already regretted staying quiet for too long. I held the door open. "Get out." They left, but not before Cody turned back one last time. "You're going to wish you kept your mouth shut, old man." I shut the door on his face, locked it, breathed. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. "You made the paper." I froze. Opened the link. There I was. Headline: "Local man abandons elderly couple at airport in holiday storm." The story was pure venom, a calculated, elegant smear. Quotes from Cody and Catherine, words like unstable, erratic, dangerous. No mention of payments. No context, just me cast as a bitter, senile man who'd snapped over Christmas. My hands clenched around the phone. Something inside me cracked, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from clarity. They had just declared war, and I was done playing nice. I stared at the article for a long time, folded it neatly, set it aside, then walked over to my desk, opened the drawer and pulled out the thick file I had avoided for months. Bank statements, receipts, photos. The rows of numbers that once kept me awake at night were now living proof. Each transfer slipped $2, $800 a month, without fail documented my steady contribution. I sorted them into stacks, numbered them, grouped them by category. Mortgage payments, renovation costs, furniture, all the invisible expenses I had poured into a house I was no longer welcome in. I wasn't doing this to settle the score. I was doing it to reclaim my dignity, and I knew exactly where to do it. When, and in front of whom, I double-checked the details of the event Isabella had posted publicly on social media. Christmas Eve dinner, 12 guests confirmed. Each name was clearly listed. Neighbors, close friends, Cody's business associates, even a few people who used to shake my hand at parties, but now avoided me like I was some freeloader. I printed 12 full packets. Each one included a copy of the slanderous article with every false detail highlighted in red. I added handwritten notes in red ink. It was 52 degrees that day. No snowstorm. And a final line: "This father didn't abandon his family. He was abandoned by them." The plan was clear in my mind. I would arrive just as everyone was sitting down. No shouting. No drama. Just one briefcase. Inside was the truth. Inside was the answer to everyone who had looked at me with pity after reading that article. For the first time in years, my heart felt strangely calm. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and I will walk into the house I once built with all my love, not to beg, but to finish. I arrived at 6:45 p.m. sharp, just as planned. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Laughter and clinking glasses spilled from the windows of the house I had paid for, a house I was no longer welcome in. Straightening my tie, I gripped the leather handle of my briefcase and stepped inside. The door, just as I'd expected, was unlocked. Isabella always bragged that this neighborhood was safe, that among the right kind of people. Locks were unnecessary. Inside, the dining room shimmered with golden lights and sparkling decor. A long table for 12 was covered in crimson linen. Crystal glasses glittered beneath the chandelier, and the aroma of rosemary and roasted lamb filled the air. Isabella stood at the head of the table, mid-toast, frozen as her eyes met mine. Conversations died. Every head turned toward the uninvited guest. "Good evening," I said, calm and steady. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything too important. I've brought a small Christmas gift for everyone." "Richard, you can't just—" Cody stood up, his voice tense. I didn't let him finish. I opened my briefcase and began placing packets in front of each guest. Bank transfers, receipts, photos. I said, 5 years worth. Every dollar I spent to buy this house, to renovate it, to furnish it, to support these dinners you're enjoying. They flipped through the documents in stunned silence. A woman in a velvet red dress squinted at a photo of Isabella posing with a shiny KitchenAid mixer. The caption read, "Proud of our journey." "This," I continued, "is also the article from 3 days ago. A public smear campaign Cody and Isabella crafted to destroy my name. Notice the parts I highlighted, Lise, about snowstorms, claims of mental instability, and not a single word about how I funded their entire lifestyle." No one said a word. Faces paled. Michael's hands trembled as he read. "I wasn't excluded from this dinner by accident," I said, voice still level. "I was left out because I didn't fit the image they were trying to project. Wrong background, wrong education, wrong pedigree except for my wallet." Catherine, Isabella's mother, finally spoke. "Isabella, is this true?" Isabella opened her mouth but couldn't form a word. Then the woman in the red dress slowly looked up at me. Her voice was almost a whisper. "Excuse me, are you Richard Flores?" I turned to her. She stood up, eyes wide with recognition. "I'm Patricia Morrison. You fixed our roof when I was a kid at the Lincoln Community Center. You brought tamales for the kids every Christmas." I was speechless. She held up the file. "I wrote the article. I didn't know it was you. But I do now, and I'm going to rewrite everything, because the man they smeared is a good man. And people deserve to know." Richard's unexpected confrontation on Christmas night sent a ripple through the dining room. But the real tide turned the next morning. Among the 12 dinner guests sat Eleanor Cartwright, a respected philanthropist and board member of the Spokane Civic Council. Known for her no-nonsense demeanor and sharp sense of justice, Eleanor had remained silent during the chaos. But when she took the packet of documents home that night, she read every page under the glow of her reading lamp, her brows furrowing deeper with each line. What she saw wasn't unfamiliar manipulation, entitlement, exploitation veiled behind a polished facade. She'd seen it all before, just never so brazenly, never so intimately. By Tana, Ambry. The next day, Eleanor made 2 phone calls. The first was to the editor-in-chief of the Spokane Review, a personal friend. The second was to Patricia Morrison, the journalist who had penned the original hit piece on Richard Flores. Patricia had barely slept. She couldn't shake the look on Richard's face, nor the flood of memories his presence had triggered. As a child from a single-parent household, she remembered waiting in building hallways while her mother cleaned offices. One winter evening, Richard had handed her a wrapped sketchbook and colored pencils. "For the artist in you," he'd said. That moment had stayed with her. Now, seeing him publicly humiliated, she felt sick. She dove into her notes, re-examining everything Cody and Isabella had told her. This time, she didn't rely on their words. She investigated. What she uncovered stunned her. Richard's decades of steady work, community service, and charitable giving, his donations to local schools, his quiet efforts to support single mothers, and even a scholarship fund he'd started in Maria's memory. None of that had been mentioned in Cody's version of the story. By Monday morning, the Spokane Review published a new front-page piece titled "The Cost of Silence: The Truth Behind the Flores Family Feud." Patricia's name was on the byline again, but this time, the article was an expose. It included the full financial records, evidence of bank transfers, photographs, and most importantly, testimonies from former employees who vouched for Richard's character. The centerpiece was a photo, young Patricia, holding that same sketchbook. Public reaction came fast and hard. Comment sections exploded with support for Richard and condemnation for Cody and Isabella. Sponsors pulled funding from Isabella's initiatives. Cody was quietly removed from 2 honorary boards. Lena, so careful with her social standing, found herself uninvited from upcoming luncheons and galas. Meanwhile, Patricia's inbox filled with messages thanking her for correcting the narrative. And then Michael appeared. He arrived at Richard's doorstep in silence, dressed simply, with red eyes and a subdued stance. "I saw the article," he said. "I didn't know what they'd done. I should have said something. I should have stood by you." By Mom's memory, Richard didn't speak at first. He just studied his son, the man who once turned his back on his father. Now humbled, "It's not about the house anymore," Richard finally said. "It's about respect." They sat outside for a while, sipping lukewarm coffee, surrounded by winter quiet. Michael spoke about selling the house, about starting fresh. Richard didn't offer money. He offered advice, like he used to, back when things were simple. And when the next spring came, Richard found himself in front of a different kind of audience. He was invited to speak at a community forum on elder abuse and financial manipulation. Eleanor introduced him herself, a man of rare dignity in an era of entitlement, she said. Patricia was in the back of the hall, taking notes and quietly snapping a photo of Richard standing behind the podium, tie straight, voice firm. He ended his speech with the words, "Family is not who takes from you, but who stands beside you when you have nothing left to give." The applause rose like a wave, but the one that meant the most came from the back of the room. Rosa, her kids, and Michael standing beside his father for the first time in years. Later that night, back at Rosa's home, Richard sat beside the fireplace, a warm plate of food in his lap and the sound of children giggling nearby. "Uncle Richard, can you draw Santa's beard on my picture?" one of the kids shouted, waving a half-finished drawing. He chuckled, took the crayon, and added soft white curls to Santa's chin. It wasn't a gala. It wasn't luxury, but it was family. He stepped outside after dinner, the sky above dark and calm. He looked up. "Maria," he whispered, "I did it." And when he returned inside, someone had saved his seat, a place that, for once, felt like it truly belonged to him. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, quiet, uneventful, until the knock on Richard's door changed everything. When he opened it, there stood Daniel, not the composed man in crisp shirts and polished shoes. This Daniel looked worn, unshaven, hollow-eyed, clutching a crumpled letter in one hand and his wedding ring in the other. "Can I come in?" he asked. Richard stepped aside without a word. Daniel sat heavily on the edge of the old sofa, the same one Richard had once offered to help him move, back when he still called him Dad without flinching. "I lost everything," Daniel said, staring at the floor. "Lena left, took the kids, said I was weak, said I embarrassed her by dragging our name into the mud." "Ok," Richard said nothing, just waited. "I thought I had everything figured out. I wanted to impress people like her, her parents, that whole world. I thought if I could be part of it, I'd finally matter." Daniel's voice cracked. "But they never accepted me. Not really. And when things turned bad, when your story came out, and people saw the truth, they didn't stand by me. They dropped me like nothing." He looked up then, eyes red. "I let them turn me against you. I believed them when they said you were less than... But you were the one who showed up. You were the one who paid the bills. You were the one who built everything we had." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm really, truly sorry." For a moment, the only sound was the wind brushing against the windows. Then Richard exhaled. "I believe you," he said. Daniel's shoulders sagged in visible relief. But Richard wasn't done. "I'll forgive you," he said slowly, "but not without something in return." Daniel blinked. "Anything? I don't need money. I don't want apologies in front of cameras. But I want you to show up. For your children, for the people who stood by you, for me. If you're ready," he leaned forward. "No more hiding behind Lena. No more pretending. You stand up and be the kind of man your mother would have been proud of. If you want forgiveness, it starts with responsibility." Daniel nodded, eyes welling up. I promise." They sat in silence for a while, two men weathered by choices, by silence, by absence, and now, perhaps, by the beginning of something new. As Daniel stood to leave, Richard stopped him. "One more thing," he said. "If you ever speak ill of your past, make sure you include the part where you tried to fix it." Daniel gave a tired smile. "Yes, sir," and then he left. That night, Richard didn't feel triumphant. He felt emptied, in the best possible way, like finally dropping a weight he'd carried for years. In the hallway, the photo of Maria and baby Daniel still hung on the wall. Richard straightened the frame, then whispered, "Let's see what kind of man he becomes now." Weeks passed. The house remained quiet, not the silence of emptiness, but of peace finally earned. One morning, while Richard watered the hydrangeas by the front steps, there was a knock. Standing there was his youngest grandson, Daniel's boy, holding a wrinkled paper star in one hand, eyes wide with uncertainty. "Mom said we shouldn't come," the boy said, "but Dad said we should choose for ourselves." Richard knelt, took the star gently, "And you chose well." That afternoon, they baked cookies with Rosa's help. The boy insisted on making one shaped like a hammer, like the one in Grandpa's photo. He beamed. Richard chuckled, warmth blooming in his chest. Later, Daniel arrived, quiet, humble. No explanations, no speeches. He simply washed dishes beside his father, while the boy napped on the couch. Richard said nothing, but he noticed this wasn't apology, it was return. He looked out the kitchen window and whispered, "Thank you, God, for not giving up on us." The second time God came to mind was hours later, as Richard sat alone with a photo album in his lap. He flipped through pages. Maria holding baby Daniel, a family barbecue, a blurry picture of a young Richard, laughing with grease-stained hands. He taped a drawing next to those memories, the crayon picture his grandson had left behind. Two stick figures under a lopsided roof. Labeled, "Grandpa's house, always welcome." That's all Richard had ever really wanted. Not praise, not credit. Just to know his love hadn't gone to waste. He had learned a few things. First, the most valuable home is not the one you build with money, but the one you build with forgiveness. Second, family is not defined by blood, but by who shows up, especially after you've been hurt. Third, it takes real strength to admit you were wrong in front of someone you've wounded. Richard stood under the porch light that evening, staring up at the stars. The breeze was light. The air smelled of bread and earth and time. "Maria," he whispered, for the third and final time that day, "I did my best, and God carried me when I couldn't carry myself." He meant it. Later that night, he sat with his phone and wrote a simple post. If you've ever felt cast out or silenced by your own family, don't seek revenge, seek the truth. God will stand with you even when no one else does. By morning, hundreds had responded. Some shared stories of fractured relationships. Others shared regrets. Many offered prayers. Richard didn't respond to all of them, but he read every word, and he knew his story wasn't just for him. It was for the fathers who stayed, the children who wandered, the homes that fractured, and the grace that slowly knits things back together. Have you ever been hurt by someone you loved? Have you struggled to be heard or find your way back home? Leave a comment below. Share your story. Maybe someone else will find their healing through yours. And if today feels like too much, remember this: God is still listening, and home is still possible.